Welcome to the English Pod community. I'm your host, Blake, and in today's episode, we'll be working on improving your English listening and speaking skills, especially for advanced learners. If you've ever struggled with understanding real-life conversations or expressing yourself naturally, this episode is for you. By listening to real-life stories and examples, you'll be able to improve both your listening and writing skills. We'll also focus on how you can speak more confidently and fluently in daily situations. For all our new listeners, let me remind you, we upload new videos every day to help you improve your English. So, let's dive in. Have you ever had trouble understanding native speakers when they talk quickly? Or maybe you've found it difficult to keep up in a conversation with friends or colleagues? Well, that's exactly what happened to me a few years ago. I remember the first time I went to a business meeting in London. The people around me were speaking so quickly, and I couldn't catch all the words. I started to feel nervous and unsure, but instead of giving up, I decided to make a change. I started listening to real-life conversations like podcasts, news reports, and even movies to help me get used to the speed of natural speech. It wasn't easy at first, but over time, I began to understand more and feel more confident. The key takeaway here is that practice is everything. The more you expose yourself to real-life conversations, the better you'll get at understanding them. Try listening to different accents, different types of speech, and even different situations. To improve your skills, let me tell you about a time when I had to speak English in a challenging situation. A few months ago, I attended a conference in the United States. The speakers were experts in their fields, and they used a lot of technical terms. At first, it was overwhelming, but I knew I had to push through. Instead of focusing on every single word I didn't understand, I started to focus on the overall meaning of the conversation. This helped me relax and understand more. I also practiced speaking with others at the conference. Some of them were more advanced than me, and that was a bit intimidating, but I realized that speaking with people who are better than you is actually a great way to learn. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's how you improve. Now, let's talk about how you can make your speaking sound more natural. One of the most important things I've learned is that in English, we don't always speak in perfect, complete sentences. Sometimes we use short phrases, contractions, or informal language. For example, instead of saying, I am going to the store, we might say, I'm heading to the store. It's faster and sounds more natural. Another tip is to practice speaking with a rhythm. In English, there's a natural flow to the language. Try reading out loud and focus on matching the rhythm of the sentences. This will help your speaking sound more fluid and less robotic. A while ago, I met a friend named Sarah. She had been learning English for years, but she still had trouble speaking fluently. We had a conversation about a recent trip she took to Paris, and I noticed something important. She kept pausing in the middle of her sentences, trying to find the perfect words. This made the conversation feel slow and awkward. I suggested to Sarah that she stop focusing so much on finding the perfect word. Instead, I told her to just keep talking and use the words she knew, even if they weren't perfect. When she stopped worrying about mistakes, her speaking became much more natural. She learned that sometimes the best way to improve speaking is to just speak. Let's talk about how you can use listening to improve your writing skills. I know it might sound strange, but listening to people talk can actually make your writing better. When you listen to conversations, pay attention to how people express their ideas. Notice how they organize their thoughts, how they connect sentences, and how they use different vocabulary. A few months ago, I worked with a student named David. He had great vocabulary but struggled to write clearly. I gave him a few listening exercises, and after listening to some TED Talks and podcasts, he started noticing how the speakers used phrases like, in addition, on the other hand, and to sum up. These phrases helped him organize his thoughts better when writing. So, if you want to improve your writing, Listen to real conversations and pay attention to how the speakers structure their sentences. This will help you use those same structures in your own writing. Lastly, let's talk about the importance of speaking regularly. You can't improve your speaking skills if you don't practice. This means finding opportunities to speak English, even if it's just with yourself. You can practice in front of a mirror, record yourself speaking, or even join a conversation group. I have a friend named Lucas, who used to be afraid of speaking in English. He didn't want to make mistakes in front of others. But after practicing, every day he became much more comfortable. The key for Lucas was practicing with friends who were also learning, which made him feel more confident. Over time, his speaking became smoother, and now he speaks like a native. All right, let's take a deeper dive into listening and speaking in real-life situations. Have you ever found yourself in a group conversation where people are talking quickly and you have no idea how to join in? It can be tough, right? Well, I remember being in that exact situation a few years ago at a social event. I was invited to a gathering with a group of native English speakers, and I was nervous. Everyone was talking at once, and they all seemed to have their own inside jokes. At first, I felt completely lost. But then I remembered one important tip. Instead of worrying about understanding everything perfectly, I started to focus on key words and phrases that I could understand. For example, I heard someone say, "I went to the beach last weekend." I joined the conversation by asking, "Oh, how was the beach?" That simple question was enough to get me involved and start speaking. When you're listening, it's not always about understanding every single word. Pay attention to the main ideas and phrases and ask follow-up questions. This will make it easier to join in and show others that you're interested in the conversation. Now, I want to talk about something important: speaking with confidence. Confidence is key when it comes to speaking English. It doesn't matter how advanced your vocabulary is if you're too shy or nervous to speak up. I remember my first presentation at a work conference. I had prepared everything, but as soon as I stood in front of the audience, I was so nervous I almost forgot everything I wanted to say. That was a wake-up call for me. I realized that to improve my speaking, I needed to stop being afraid of making mistakes. I started practicing speaking in front of a mirror, giving little mini presentations to myself. It felt silly at first, but over time, I got more comfortable. The more I practiced speaking out loud, the more natural it became. One trick that really helped me was focusing on my posture. When I stood tall and kept my shoulders back, I instantly felt more confident. So, if you're practicing speaking, remember to stand or sit up straight and speak clearly. It will not only help you feel more confident, but it will also make you sound more fluent. Speaking of confidence, another way to boost your speaking skills is by having real conversations with native speakers. Now, I know this can be intimidating, but it's one of the fastest ways to improve. My friend Emily, who is also learning English, made this part of her routine. She set a goal to have at least one English conversation every day. It didn't matter if the conversation was short or if she made mistakes. She just kept speaking. The first time Emily spoke with a native speaker, she was nervous. She didn't know all the vocabulary and was worried about making mistakes. But what happened next really surprised her. The person she was speaking to was incredibly patient and encouraging. This gave Emily the confidence to keep talking, even when she made errors. The more she spoke, the faster she improved. If you don't have access to native speakers, there are still many ways to practice speaking. You can join online language exchange groups, speak with fellow learners, or even find conversation partners through apps. The more you practice speaking, the more. Now let's talk about the role of storytelling in both listening and speaking. Storytelling is one of the best ways to improve your speaking and writing skills because it helps you organize your thoughts and communicate ideas clearly. A few years ago, I decided to tell a story at a local event. The story was about a trip I took to Italy. I remember preparing for weeks, practicing how to tell the story in English. The event was small, but it gave me the opportunity to speak in front of an audience. I was nervous, but once I started telling the story, I felt a sense of connection with the listeners. The great thing about storytelling is that it allows you to use language in a natural way. You don't need to focus on using complex vocabulary. Just tell your story. This will help you practice both your speaking fluency and your ability to organize ideas. When you practice storytelling, try to make it engaging. Use pauses, emphasize certain words, and make eye contact with your listener if possible. If you're not sure where to start, think about something interesting that happened in your life. It could be a funny situation, an exciting adventure, or even something you learned the hard way. Practice telling that story in English. Don't worry about mistakes. Just enjoy the process of sharing your story with others. Another fun and effective way to practice your speaking and listening skills is by watching TV shows and movies. This method can be very useful because it helps you hear natural, everyday English. Plus, it gives you a chance to hear different accents and speaking styles. Let me tell you about my experience with watching TV shows in English. At first, I was watching shows with subtitles, thinking that I would understand everything. But soon, I realized I wasn't really paying attention to the language. I was just reading the subtitles and not focusing on the pronunciation or the flow of the conversation. So I decided to switch things up. I started watching the same shows, but this time I turned off the subtitles. It was hard at first, but it pushed me to focus on the words and how they were spoken. I would pause the show if I didn't understand something and try to figure it out from the context. Over time, this improved both my listening and speaking skills. One tip I recommend is to repeat what you hear in the show. Try to mimic the characters' pronunciation, intonation, and rhythm. This will help you sound more natural when speaking. Let's also talk about listening to podcasts. I find that podcasts are one of the best ways to improve listening skills, especially because they cover so many different topics. In fact, I started listening to a lot of business and technology podcasts when I wanted to improve my vocabulary in those areas. I remember listening to a podcast about artificial intelligence. At first, I had no idea what the hosts were talking about because they use so many technical terms. But instead of getting frustrated, I took notes on the words I didn't understand and looked them up later. The more I listened to that podcast, the more I understood. It wasn't just about the vocabulary, it was also about getting used to how the hosts communicated ideas and built conversations. So, I encourage you to find podcasts that interest you. Whether it's about cooking, travel, or business, there's something out there for everyone. The more you listen, the more your listening skills will improve. And don't forget to practice speaking by repeating what you hear. All right, now let's dive into a topic that many advanced learners find tricky: phrasal verbs. These little phrases can change the meaning of simple verbs, and they are essential for sounding more like a native speaker. I remember when I first started learning phrasal verbs, it was overwhelming. There are so many of them, and they often have multiple meanings depending on the context. But I found a method that helped me a lot. I decided to focus on learning just a few phrasal verbs each week. For example, I learned pick up, which can mean to collect something or to improve. One day, I was talking to my friend Lucas, and he said, "My English is really picking up." I immediately understood that his English was improving. By using this phrasal verb in a conversation, I not only improved my speaking, but also became more confident in using it naturally. To make it easier for you, I recommend choosing a theme each week. For example, one week, focus on phrasal verbs related to travel, like check in, take off, or get away. The next week, try ones related to work, like bring up, carry out, or call off. Practice using these phrasal verbs in your own sentences, and over time, you'll notice that they become part of your everyday language. Now, let's talk about listening to different types of English accents. When I first started learning English, I mostly listen to American English, but then I realized that English is spoken in many different countries, and there are so many accents out there. This can be a challenge, but it's also an amazing opportunity to improve your listening skills. One of my favorite experiences was traveling to the UK for the first time. I was visiting London, and at the airport, I overheard a conversation between a local and a tourist. The local had such a strong British accent that I had trouble understanding him. But instead of feeling discouraged, I tried to listen closely and focused on the words that were familiar to me. Over time, I started to recognize the patterns in the accent. For example, I noticed that the British tend to drop the R sound, like in the word car. This experience taught me the importance of exposing myself to different accents. It's a bit challenging at first, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. I recommend listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, or even listening to songs from different English-speaking countries. Try to pay attention to how the words are pronounced and see if you can adapt your own speaking style to be more flexible with different accents. A great way to continue improving your listening and speaking is through shadowing. Shadowing is a technique where you repeat what you hear in real time, trying to mimic the speaker as closely as possible. It's one of the best ways to improve your fluency and accent. I used this technique when I was trying to improve my pronunciation. I would watch YouTube videos or listen to podcasts in English and pause every few seconds to repeat what the speaker said. At first, it was really hard, especially when the speaker was talking fast, but I kept practicing, and over time, my fluency and confidence improved. The key is to pay attention to how the speaker moves their mouth, their intonation, and how they emphasize certain words. One of the videos I used for shadowing was a TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson. He speaks slowly, but his ideas are complex. I remember watching one part where he talked about how schools kill creativity. The way he said creativity made me pause and think, wow, that's how I want to say it. By repeating what I heard, I improved both my listening and speaking skills. It also helped me feel more confident in conversations when I was speaking about serious topics. As you continue improving your English, it's important to remember that learning a language is not just about memorizing vocabulary or grammar rules. It's about connecting with people. A great way to practice both listening and speaking is by engaging in real-life conversations with people from different backgrounds. I have a friend named Sarah who moved to my city from Spain. She spoke great English, but she wanted to get even better. So we decided to meet once a week and practice speaking. We'd talk about anything, from books we were reading to our favorite movies. At first, Sarah was a bit nervous, but she quickly became more comfortable, especially when she realized that I wasn't judging her mistakes. Over time, Sarah's confidence grew, and her speaking skills improved significantly. One thing Sarah did that I really admired was that she didn't wait until she was perfect to speak. She made mistakes, and I made mistakes, but we both understood that the point was to communicate. And that's what I want you to remember. It's not about perfection. It's about connection. So find opportunities to speak with others, whether it's through language exchange apps, local meetups, or even casual conversations in your community. I also want to talk about something that many advanced learners struggle with: speaking naturally. A lot of learners can speak correctly, but they sound a bit stiff or formal. The trick is to practice speaking in a relaxed, conversational style. I had an experience with this when I was working in a cafe. One day, a customer came in and asked for a recommendation. I replied with, "I would recommend the cappuccino as it's a popular choice here." But the customer smiled and said, "You sound like you're reading from a menu." That comment made me realize that I sounded a bit too formal, so I decided to change the way I spoke. Instead of using long, formal sentences, I started using shorter, simpler phrases like, "If you're in the mood for something sweet, the cappuccino is great." It felt more natural and friendly. When you speak English, try to use more contractions. like don't instead of do not and can't instead of cannot. This will make you sound more natural, and people will find it easier to connect with you. One more thing that helped me with my listening and speaking skills was learning to think in English. When I first started, I would often translate everything from my native language into English. This slowed me down and made me sound less fluent. But once I began to think directly in English, my speaking improved dramatically. A great exercise I did was narrating my day in English. For example, when I woke up in the morning, I would think, I need to get up now. I have a busy day ahead. Instead of translating these thoughts from my native language, I focused on thinking in English. This practice helped me get used to thinking in the language and responding more quickly when I was speaking. If you haven't tried thinking in English yet, give it a try. Start with small things, like talking to yourself in your mind about what you're doing. Over time, you'll find it easier to think in English during conversations, and your speaking will feel more natural. Let's talk now about understanding complex ideas in English, especially when you're listening to something challenging, like a lecture, podcast, or even a news report. Sometimes we hear advanced English and feel overwhelmed because the words and phrases are unfamiliar. But I've learned that the key is to focus on understanding the main message first, rather than stressing about every single word. One time, I was listening to an interview with an author about a book on climate change. Some of the words were difficult, like carbon emissions and sustainable development, but instead of getting stuck on those, I listened for the main ideas. The author explained how small changes like reducing waste or supporting clean energy can help the environment. I didn't know every single word, but I understood the bigger picture. To practice this, try listening to podcasts or watching videos that discuss complex topics but in English that's accessible. For example, watch a documentary about space or technology. Focus on understanding the main points, even if you don't get every detail. Then, listen to it again to see if you can pick up more words or phrases. Over time, this approach will help you become more comfortable with listening to advanced material. Speaking of complex ideas, when you're discussing them, it's important to be able to explain your thoughts clearly. And to do that, you need to be able to use a range of vocabulary that's not only correct, but also precise. One of the ways I improved my speaking ability was by learning to explain difficult concepts in simpler words. I remember during a group discussion at a seminar, we were talking about the impact of social media on society. One of my colleagues, Emma, used a really technical term to explain something, but then she realized that not everyone in the group understood it. So, she paused and rephrased it in simpler words, saying, "It's like when people share moments of their life on social media, it can change how they see themselves and how others see them." This was a great lesson for me. I realized that when you use complicated words, you risk confusing the listener. But when you break down your ideas into simpler parts, it becomes easier for everyone to follow. Practice doing this with your own ideas. Try explaining a difficult topic in English, but use simpler words so that anyone can understand. Whether you're talking about science, technology, or art, learning to explain ideas in a clear, understandable way will make your English sound even more fluent. Let's now focus on improving your fluency, which is a big part of sounding natural when you speak. Fluency isn't just about speaking quickly, it's about speaking smoothly and clearly. One thing that helped me improve my fluency was practicing with different speaking exercises, especially those that forced me to think and respond quickly. Fun exercise I did was something called story circles. This is where you and a partner take turns adding one sentence at a time to create a story. The catch is, you only have a few seconds to think of your next sentence. At first, I felt nervous because I didn't want to make mistakes. But over time, I got better at speaking spontaneously, and my fluency improved. You can practice this with a language partner or even by yourself, by choosing a random word and then trying to say a sentence using that word. Try to do it quickly. without stopping or thinking too much. This will help you become more comfortable with speaking on the spot, and you'll sound more natural when having real conversations. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about using idioms in your conversations. Idioms are phrases where the meaning isn't immediately clear from the individual words. For example, "It's raining cats and dogs" means it's raining very heavily. When I first started learning English, I avoided using idioms because I thought they were too complicated. But then I realized that idioms are actually very useful for sounding more like a native speaker. I started learning a few idioms each week and tried to use them in conversations. One time I used break the ice during a meeting. I said, "Let's play a game to break the ice." It was a fun way to get everyone relaxed and talking. And when I said it, everyone smiled because it's a familiar expression. The more idioms you learn, the more natural you'll sound. The key is to start small. Learn just 1 or 2 new idioms each week and practice using them in conversations. Over time, you'll start using them without even thinking about it. Speaking of idioms, let's talk about improving your listening comprehension in situations where people speak quickly or use informal language. Sometimes, in movies or real-life conversations, people talk so fast that it's hard to keep up. This can be a challenge for advanced learners, but there are ways to tackle it. One thing that helped me was watching movies without subtitles. The first time I did this, I missed a lot of details. But as I watched more, I started to pick up on how the characters spoke and what they meant even when I didn't understand every single word. For example, I watched a movie where 2 characters were talking about a road trip. They said things like, "We're hitting the road tomorrow, and let's grab a bite." At first, I didn't know what hitting the road meant, but then I figured out it was just another way of saying leaving or starting the trip. This experience taught me that sometimes it's not about understanding every word. It's about figuring out the overall meaning from the context. So if you find yourself in a conversation where the speaker is talking quickly, don't panic. Instead, try to focus on the general message they're trying to communicate. With time, you'll get better at understanding even when people speak fast or use informal language. When it comes to advanced English, you may also find that some people use slang. Slang is informal language that can be confusing if you're not familiar with it. One time I was chatting with a friend from New York, and he used the word chill to describe someone's attitude. He said, "She's really chill, so you don't have to worry." At first, I didn't understand what he meant by chill. But then I realized he was talking about how relaxed and easygoing she was. Learning slang can be a fun and important way to improve your listening and speaking. But it's important to use slang in the right context. If you're speaking to someone in a formal situation, it's best to avoid using too much slang. But if you're chatting with friends or in casual conversations, using a little slang can make you sound more natural. A great way to learn slang is by listening to how native speakers use it in everyday conversations. You can watch shows, listen to podcasts, or even chat with friends who are native speakers. Try to learn a few new slang words each week, but remember to use them sparingly and appropriately. To round out today's episode, let's talk about confidence. As you improve your listening and speaking skills, one thing that will really help you is feeling confident in yourself and your ability to communicate. I know that when I was first learning, I often felt nervous about making mistakes. But over time, I realized that making mistakes is part of the learning process. One time, I was at a meeting with a group of professionals, and I had to give a short presentation. I was nervous because I knew my English wasn't perfect, but I decided to focus on what I wanted to say, not on the mistakes I might make. I spoke slowly and clearly, and even though I made a couple of mistakes, I could tell that everyone understood me. Afterward, someone told me that my presentation was great, and that they appreciated how clearly I explained my ideas. This taught me a valuable lesson. Confidence is key. Even if your English isn't perfect, if you speak with confidence, people will listen and understand. So, don't be afraid to make mistakes. Embrace them as part of your journey to becoming more fluent in English. Lastly, let's talk about speaking with native speakers and how it can help you improve your English. Many advanced learners feel nervous or intimidated when speaking with native speakers, but remember that they're just people like you, and they will appreciate the effort you put into speaking their language. I had the chance to practice my English with a native speaker during a trip to Australia. I was a bit nervous at first because their accent was different from what I was used to, but I soon realized that the most important thing was to relax and focus on communicating my ideas. I didn't worry about making mistakes or speaking perfectly. We had a great conversation about life in Australia, and by the end of it, I felt more confident in my ability to speak English. When you get the chance to speak with native speakers, take advantage of it. Don't worry about being perfect. Just focus on communicating and enjoying the conversation. The more you practice speaking with native speakers, the more natural and confident you'll feel. Let's talk about one of the most important things in English learning: how to stay motivated and keep improving. Many learners start with enthusiasm, but over time they feel stuck, frustrated, or even lose interest. This happens to everyone, and it's completely normal. But the key is to find ways to keep going, even when learning feels difficult. I remember talking to a friend named Daniel, who had been learning English for years. At first, he was excited. He practiced every day, watched movies in English, and even wrote a journal in English. But after some time, he felt like he wasn't improving anymore. He told me, "I've been studying for so long, but I still struggle to understand native speakers when they talk fast. Maybe I'm just not good at learning languages." Have you ever felt this way? Maybe you've been studying for a long time, but you still struggle with certain things like fast conversations, difficult vocabulary, or tricky grammar rules. When this happens, it's easy to feel discouraged. But here's what I told Daniel. You're not stuck. You just need to change the way you're learning. Instead of doing the same things every day, try changing your routine. If you always listen to podcasts, try watching TV shows with subtitles. If you usually read articles, try listening to audiobooks instead. Your brain loves variety, and switching things up will help you learn in new ways. Daniel took this advice and started focusing on real-life conversations. He joined an online English-speaking group, where he practiced talking with people from different countries. After a few weeks, he felt more confident, and listening became easier for him. So if you ever feel stuck, don't give up. Just try something different. Keep finding new ways to challenge yourself, and you'll see progress over time. Now let's talk about a problem that many English learners face: forgetting words. Have you ever learned a new word, felt excited to use it, but then forgot it the next day? This happens to everyone, even native speakers. But there are some simple tricks to help you remember new words more easily. One of my students, Maria, used to struggle with this a lot. She would learn new words in her English class, but by the time she wanted to use them in conversation, they were gone from her memory. She told me, "I don't know why, but I keep forgetting the words I learn." So I gave her a simple challenge. Instead of just writing down new words in a notebook, she had to use each word in a real sentence at least 3 times during the day. For example, if she learned the word fascinating, she had to say, "That documentary was fascinating." Or, "My teacher told me a fascinating story today." By using the word multiple times, she helped her brain remember it better. Another great way to remember words is to connect them to real-life experiences. Let's say you learn the word delicious. Instead of just memorizing it, think about a time when you ate something really tasty. Maybe you had a delicious chocolate cake at a party. If you connect the word to a personal memory, you'll remember it much better. So, next time you learn a new word, don't just write it down. Use it in a sentence, connect it to a real memory, and repeat it a few times throughout the day. This will help you remember new vocabulary much more. Another common challenge for English learners is speaking fluently without stopping or hesitating. Maybe you know a lot of words, but when you try to speak, you feel nervous, and your mind goes blank. If this happens to you, don't worry. There are ways to improve fluency. Let me tell you about a student named Ahmed. He had studied English for years and could read and write very well. But when he tried to speak, he would stop in the middle of a sentence, searching for words. He told me, "I always know what I want to say in my head, but when I try to speak, I freeze." I gave Ahmed a simple exercise to practice, speaking without stopping. Here's how it works. Pick a topic, set a timer for 1 minute, and talk about that topic without stopping. Even if you make mistakes, don't stop. If you can't think of a word, use a different word or describe what you mean. For example, if you want to say I bought a new jacket, but you forget the word jacket, you can say I bought new clothes for the cold weather. This way, you keep the conversation going without stopping. Ahmed practiced this every day, and after a few weeks, he felt much more confident speaking. Another trick to improve fluency is shadowing. This means listening to a native speaker and repeating exactly what they say, at the same time they say it. You can do this with podcasts, movies, or YouTube videos. By copying the rhythm and pronunciation of native speakers, you'll train your brain to speak more naturally. If you struggle with fluency, try these 2 methods, speaking without, stopping and shadowing. They might feel difficult at first, but if you practice regularly, you'll see huge improvements in your speaking skills. Now let's talk about an important part of advanced English, understanding jokes and humor. English speakers often use jokes, wordplay, and sarcasm in conversations. If you don't understand these, you might feel confused or left out. One time, I was at a dinner with some American friends, and one of them said, "I told my suitcase that there will be no vacations this year. Now I'm dealing with emotional baggage." Everyone laughed, but I was confused. Then I realized it was a joke. Emotional baggage usually means feelings from the past that still affect you, but in this joke, it was about a suitcase. It was a play on words. Understanding humor in English takes practice. A good way to start is by watching comedy shows or stand-up comedians. If you don't understand a joke, don't worry. Try looking up the meaning. And over time, you'll start recognizing different types of humor. Sarcasm is another tricky part of English. Sometimes people say the opposite of what they mean. For example, if someone walks outside in heavy rain and says, "Wow, what a beautiful day," they don't actually mean it's beautiful. They're being sarcastic. The more you listen to native speakers, the more you'll understand these small details in conversation. And once you do, you'll feel more comfortable and confident when speaking in real-life situations. Another challenge for English learners is understanding fast speech. Native speakers often speak quickly, connect words together, or drop sounds, making it hard to follow. But there are ways to improve your listening skills. Let me give you an example. In formal English, you might hear, "What do you want to do?" But in fast, casual speech, a native speaker might say, "What do you want to do?" At first, this might sound like a completely different sentence. But with practice, you'll start recognizing these patterns. One way to improve is by listening to fast conversations and trying to repeat what you hear. You don't need to understand every single word. Focus on catching the key words and the general meaning. Another trick is to use subtitles when watching English videos. Start with subtitles in your language, then switch to English subtitles, and finally, watch without any subtitles. This will help you get used to natural English. Speed. Now let's dive into a topic that many advanced English learners face: understanding idioms. Idiomatic expressions are phrases where the meaning isn't exactly what the words say. For example, "It's raining cats and dogs" doesn't mean actual cats or dogs are falling from the sky. It simply means it's raining heavily. These types of expressions can be really tricky for learners, but once you understand them, they'll make you sound more natural and fluent in English. I remember when I first encountered the phrase "break the ice," I thought it was about literally breaking ice. I was at a party and someone used the expression when they introduced themselves, "Let's break the ice. Tell me something interesting about you." At that moment, I was a little confused. Why would they talk about ice? But after asking around, I learned that breaking the ice means to start a conversation and make people feel more comfortable. When you start hearing idioms, they might seem weird, but they are an important part of daily English conversations. There are so many like kick the bucket, which means someone passed away, or a piece of cake, something that's very easy to do. One of my students, Ahmed, had a funny experience when he didn't understand an idiom. He was talking to a native speaker and said, "I've been trying to break the ice with everyone, but no one is responding." The native speaker laughed and replied, "Well, if you're actually breaking ice, you might want to try a different approach." Ahmed thought it was a strange comment until he realized that breaking the ice was about starting a conversation and not literally smashing ice. So, how can you improve your understanding of idioms? First, start by reading books, listening to podcasts, and watching movies or TV shows in English. Idioms often appear in storytelling, jokes, or even casual conversations. When you hear one, try to guess its meaning from the context. If you can't figure it out, look it up. But make sure you learn the idiom and practice using it yourself. Once you start incorporating idioms into your own conversations, you'll notice how much more natural your speech sounds. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about something every advanced learner needs: cultural understanding. English isn't just about grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. It's also about understanding the culture behind the language. When you know more about a culture, it helps you communicate more effectively and avoid misunderstandings. For instance, in some cultures, direct communication is the norm. But in English-speaking countries, it's often more polite to be indirect. For example, let's say you want to ask someone to do something for you. In some languages, it's common to say, "Do this now." But in English, it's more common to ask, "Could you please do this for me?" Or, "Would you mind doing this?" This shows respect and politeness. One of my students, Sarah, came from a country where direct communication was very common. She once told me about a misunderstanding with an American friend. She had asked her friend, "Give me your phone," without thinking much about it. Her friend was shocked and didn't know how to respond. Sarah didn't understand why her friend was upset until she learned that in English-speaking cultures, that kind of directness can sound rude. To improve your communication skills, try learning more about English-speaking cultures. Watch documentaries, read books, and ask native speakers about their customs. The more you understand the culture, the better you'll be able to adapt your language to fit different situations. As we move on, let's talk about one more important skill for advanced learners: listening to different accents. English is spoken all around the world, and each country has its own unique accent. In the US, you have different accents in the South, the North, and the West. In the UK, there are accents like Cockney, RP, received pronunciation, and Scottish. And in Australia, there's the famous Aussie accent. At first, it can be tough to understand these different accents. But don't worry, because with time, you'll become better at recognizing them. One way to improve is by listening to people from different English-speaking countries. Watch TV shows, movies, or listen to podcasts where speakers have different accents. Start by focusing on the context of the conversation. Even if you don't understand every word, you'll get the main idea. I remember when I first tried to understand an Australian accent. At first, I couldn't catch most of the words. They speak so fast, and they blend words together. But after listening to more Australian podcasts, I started recognizing patterns in their speech. I learned that Australians often drop the R sound, like in the word car. It sounds more like ka. Now I can understand Australian speakers much better. Now let's dive into another important topic for advanced learners: learning to think in English. This can be a game changer when it comes to improving your fluency. You see, many advanced learners still translate from their native language into English when they speak, which can slow them down. But once you start thinking in English, your speech becomes much smoother and faster. When I first learned English, I would always think in my native language and then translate it into English. It made conversations feel slow, and I had to pause a lot. I remember one particular moment during my travels. I was in a coffee shop in London, and I wanted to order a simple coffee. I kept thinking, how do I say this in English? And I got stuck. I finally said, could I have a cup of coffee? It wasn't wrong, but it was awkward. The more I practiced, the more I started thinking in English. And soon enough, I didn't have to pause and think before I spoke. I could just say what I wanted without second-guessing myself. Thinking in English takes time, but it's possible with practice. One way to start is by surrounding yourself with English. Change your phone settings to English, follow social media accounts that post in English, and try to read books or listen to podcasts in English daily. The more you expose yourself to the language, the easier it becomes to think in it. Here's a little exercise you can try. Take an everyday situation and describe it in English. For example, when you wake up in the morning, instead of thinking in your native language about your plans for the day, try to think directly in English. What's the first thing you do? Do you drink coffee or tea? Do you check your phone? Describe these actions in English as you do them. Over time, this practice helps you naturally start thinking in English, which will improve both your speaking and writing skills. Another thing that really helped me with thinking in English was talking to myself. I would walk around speaking out loud about what I was doing. If I was cooking, I would say, I am chopping the onions. Now I'm stirring the sauce. It may feel strange at first, but it helps to build the habit of thinking in English. Eventually, it becomes second nature. Now let's talk about a topic that can sometimes feel intimidating for advanced learners: expressing opinions in a balanced way. This is especially useful in formal settings, like meetings or debates. It's not just about saying, I think this is good, or I believe that is bad. Advanced learners need to know how to express opinions clearly, but also how to show understanding of other viewpoints. I had a friend named Raj who was a very advanced English speaker. He worked in a multinational company, and during one of the meetings, they were discussing a new marketing strategy. Raj's colleague Lisa made a suggestion that Raj didn't agree with. Instead of simply saying, I don't think that will work, Raj said, I see your point, Lisa, but I think the strategy might need a bit more focus on social media. This response showed that he respected Lisa's idea, but also presented his opinion in a constructive way. It wasn't just about disagreeing, but about adding value to the discussion. To express opinions clearly in English, it's important to use phrases that show respect for others' viewpoints. For example, I understand your point, but, or that's an interesting idea and I would like to add. These phrases help you sound more diplomatic and open-minded. When you add your own opinion, it's also important to support it with examples or reasons. This helps others understand where you're coming from and why you believe what you do. In your day-to-day conversations, try to practice expressing your opinion in a balanced way. Whether you're discussing a book, a movie, or a political issue, make sure to listen to others and acknowledge their opinions before adding your own. This approach will make your English sound more sophisticated and thoughtful. Let's now talk about how to improve your writing skills. While listening and speaking are often the focus of language learning, writing is equally important. To improve your writing, especially at an advanced level, it's essential to focus on structure, clarity, and creativity. When I first started writing in English, I would often get stuck because I didn't know how to organize my ideas. I would write long paragraphs with no clear structure. Over time, I learned that a good essay or article needs a strong introduction, body, and conclusion. Each paragraph should focus on one idea and be linked to the next. For example, When I write a persuasive essay, I begin with an introduction. That presents my main argument. Then I use each paragraph to explain a different reason why my argument is valid, and I end with a conclusion that summarizes my points. One of the best ways to improve writing is by reading. Reading books, articles, and even blogs written in English helps you see how good writers structure their ideas. Pay attention to how they introduce their topics, present evidence, and conclude their arguments. Also, try writing short essays or stories based on your own experiences. The more you write, the more natural it will feel, and soon you'll be able to express complex ideas clearly in writing. To summarize, improving both your writing and speaking skills in English involves practice, patience, and exposure to real-life situations. By incorporating idioms, mastering storytelling, expressing your opinions with balance, and improving your writing, you'll continue to grow as an advanced English speaker. Let's talk about another important aspect of English fluency: mastering the use of phrasal verbs. For advanced learners, phrasal verbs are a huge part of daily conversation, and they can make your English sound more natural. A phrasal verb is a verb combined with a preposition or an adverb, and its meaning can often be very different from the original verb. For example, look up doesn't just mean to look at something above you, but it can also mean to search for information. Understanding phrasal verbs is essential for understanding real conversations in English because native speakers use them all the time. When I was learning English, I often found phrasal verbs confusing. One day, I was having a conversation with a friend named Sarah. We were talking about a book I had just read. She said, "Oh, I think that book really takes off after the first few chapters." At first, I didn't understand what she meant by takes off. I thought it had something to do with an airplane. But then she explained that takes off meant the story becomes really exciting after a slow start. Phrasal verbs can make your English sound more like a native speaker's. They're used in casual speech, in movies, and even in professional settings. Instead of saying, "the meeting will begin," you might say, "the meeting will kick off." Instead of saying, "I will get rid of the old furniture," you can say, "I will clear out the old furniture." These small changes will help make your speech sound more authentic and natural. To really master phrasal verbs, you need to practice using them regularly. Start by focusing on a few common ones and try to use them in sentences. For example, try saying, "I need to pick up some groceries," or "I'll try to figure out the problem." Once you get comfortable with them, you'll be able to use more advanced phrasal verbs naturally. Another great way to improve your English is by practicing public speaking. Now, I know this might sound intimidating, but let me tell you, public speaking is a powerful skill. It's not just for giving presentations at work or school. It's for communicating clearly and confidently in any situation. When I was first asked to give a presentation at a conference, I was nervous. I knew my English was strong, but I wasn't confident about speaking in front of a big group. I practiced every day before the event. I would speak in front of the mirror, record myself, and listen to the recordings to see what needed improvement. One of the things I noticed was that I would speak too fast when I was nervous. To fix this, I started practicing slowing down my speech and using pauses to emphasize key points. I remember one time I was presenting a project I had worked on for months. When I started, I felt nervous and my hands were shaking, but I made sure to take a deep breath and slow down. I could feel the difference in my speech when I took my time. The audience seemed more engaged, and I was able to get my points across clearly. After that experience, I became more confident in my speaking skills, and I realized how important it is to practice public speaking in English. One of the best ways to practice public speaking is by recording yourself. Choose a topic you're interested in and talk about it for a few minutes. Listen to your recording and pay attention to your pronunciation, pace, and intonation. You can also ask a friend or a teacher to listen to your speech and give you feedback. The more you practice, the better your public speaking will get, and your English will sound more. Let's now discuss another skill that can greatly improve your English speaking: active listening. Active listening means paying full attention to what someone is saying, understanding it, and responding thoughtfully. It's more than just hearing the words. It's about understanding the meaning behind them. As an advanced learner, you'll encounter many different accents, slang, and expressions that may not be in your textbook. But by practicing active listening, you'll be able to understand people more easily. I'll give you an example from my own life. Last year, I traveled to Australia, and I had the chance to speak with some locals. Their accent was strong, and they used a lot of slang that I wasn't familiar with. I remember one conversation where they kept saying arvo instead of afternoon. At first, I had no idea what they were talking about, but instead of getting frustrated, I asked them to clarify, and they explained that arvo is just a casual way to say afternoon. Through active listening, I learned how to decode accents and slang. I also learned how to use context clues to understand what people were saying, even when I didn't know every word they used. This is a key skill for any advanced English learner. Whether you're watching a movie, listening to a podcast, or speaking with native speakers, it's important to actively listen and try to understand the meaning behind the words. Here's an exercise you can try. Find a podcast or a video in English with a speaker who has an accent you're not familiar with. Listen carefully to the speaker and pay attention to the words, expressions, and pronunciation. Afterward, try to summarize what they said in your own words. This will help you improve your listening skills and give you confidence in understanding different accents. Now, let's move on to a topic that can sometimes be tricky for advanced learners: expressing your emotions and feelings in English. In your own language, you may have many ways to express how you feel, but in English, there are also a variety of ways to express emotions. Learning these different expressions will help you sound more natural and give you the ability to communicate your emotions clearly. I'll share a personal story to illustrate this. A few years ago, I had a friend named Marco, who was an advanced English learner. One day he told me that he was feeling blue because he had missed an important event. At first, I didn't understand what he meant by blue, but he explained that it was a way of saying he was feeling sad or down. This was a great moment for me because I learned how native speakers use color expressions to describe emotions. For example, saying "I'm feeling blue" means you're feeling sad, and "green with envy" means you're very jealous. In English, there are many different ways to describe your emotions. For example, you can say, "I'm thrilled," "I'm over the moon," or "I'm on cloud 9" to express happiness. If you're angry, you might say, "I'm really pissed off," or "I'm furious." If you're nervous, you could say, "I've got butterflies in my stomach," or "I'm feeling jittery." Using these expressions will help you sound more natural and connected to your emotions. A great way to practice expressing emotions in English is by talking about your day or your feelings in the language. Try using different expressions for happiness, sadness, frustration, or excitement. For example, you could say, "I was so excited when I found out about the news," or "I was feeling really stressed because of the deadline." The more you practice, another key aspect of mastering English at an advanced level is learning how to use idiomatic expressions. Idioms are phrases where the meaning is not directly connected to the words used, and they can be tricky because they don't always make sense if you translate them literally. However, learning idiomatic expressions is an important part of sounding natural in conversation, as native speakers often use them. For example, let me tell you about a time I was talking to my friend Sarah, who is from the UK. We were discussing a big project we were both working on, and she said, "Don't worry, Blake, it's not the end of the world." At first, I wasn't sure what she meant, but she was trying to reassure me. She wasn't saying the world was literally ending, of course. Instead, she was telling me not to panic. "It's not the end of the world" is an idiom meaning something is not as bad as it seems, and it's not worth stressing over. Using idioms like this can make you sound much more fluent. For example, instead of saying, "I'm very happy today," you might say, "I'm on top of the world." Or instead of saying, "It's very hard to make this decision," you could say, "I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place." Idioms add flavor to your language and make it more lively and engaging. When I was learning English, I found idioms a bit difficult to understand at first, but over time I started to see patterns. Certain idioms are used in specific contexts. For example, if you're talking about something difficult, you might hear phrases like a tough nut to crack, or if someone is feeling really tired, they might say, I'm running on fumes. These expressions are not only fun to use, but also help to show your understanding of how native speakers think and talk. A good way to practice idioms is by reading books or watching movies in English. Pay attention to how idioms are used in context, and try to use them in your own conversations. You can also keep a list of idioms that you come across, and each time you hear one, try to use it in a sentence of your own. This will help you to get more comfortable with them and integrate them into your everyday English. Now let's talk about the importance of tone and intonation in English. Tone and intonation can completely change the meaning of a sentence, and they're important to understand if you want to sound more natural when speaking. For example, if you say, I can't believe it, with a rising tone at the end, it sounds like you're surprised. But if you say the same sentence with a falling tone, it might sound like you're disappointed or upset. When I was learning English, I noticed that I would often sound flat or robotic when I spoke. I would say everything in the same tone, and it wasn't until I started paying attention to how native speakers used intonation that I realized how much it affected the message. For instance, when you ask a question, your tone typically rises at the end of the sentence, like, are you coming to the party? But if you're making a statement, your tone generally falls, like, I'm going to the party. Let me share a story to explain how tone and intonation can change the meaning. I was once in a meeting with a colleague, Mark, and we were discussing a project. At one point, I said, that sounds great. I said it in a neutral tone, but Mark immediately asked, are you sure? You don't sound very excited. I realized that my tone had made it sound like I wasn't enthusiastic, even though I was. I had to adjust my intonation to make sure I conveyed my true feelings. To improve your tone and intonation, I recommend practicing with a variety of materials. You can listen to podcasts, watch TV shows or movies, and pay close attention to how speakers use their voices. Try to mimic the way they speak, focusing on their pitch, rhythm, and emphasis. Record yourself speaking, and listen back to see if you're using the correct intonation. Now let's dive into a crucial part of advanced English: mastering the art of storytelling. Whether you're speaking at work, giving a presentation, or just having a conversation with friends, storytelling is a powerful tool to keep your listeners engaged. When you tell a story, you don't just share information. You share emotions, experiences, and lessons. A good story can captivate your audience, whether it's a personal experience or a professional situation. Let me tell you about a time when storytelling really helped me in a business meeting. I was presenting a new idea to a group of colleagues, and I knew that just presenting facts and figures wouldn't be enough to capture their attention. So I started by telling a story about a time I had faced a similar challenge and how I had solved it. The story was relevant to the project we were discussing, and it helped the team understand the concept better. By the end of the presentation, my colleagues were engaged, and they seemed much more interested in the idea. When telling a story in English, it's important to include details that paint a clear picture for the listener. Instead of saying, I was really tired, you could say, I was exhausted. My body felt heavy, and I couldn't keep my eyes open. The more vivid your story, the more your listeners will be able to connect with you and understand your message. Another key element of storytelling is pacing. You don't want to rush through your story, but you also don't want to drag it out. Practice telling stories with a clear beginning, middle, and end, and use pauses to emphasize important points. One technique I recommend for improving your storytelling is to focus on your story arc. A story arc is the structure that helps guide your story from start to finish. Start with an interesting introduction to hook your audience, build tension or excitement in the middle, and then resolve the story with a satisfying conclusion. This method works not just in storytelling, but in any situation where you want to keep your audience engaged, such as giving a speech or making a presentation. Now, let's move on to the topic of vocabulary expansion. As an advanced English learner, you likely already have a good understanding of basic vocabulary. However, to sound even more fluent and sophisticated, you need to keep expanding your vocabulary. This doesn't just mean learning new words, but also learning how to use them in context. When I was learning, I kept a vocabulary journal. Every time I came across a new word or phrase, I would write it down and try to use it in a sentence. For example, I learned the word melancholy when reading a novel, which means a feeling of sadness or sorrow. I wrote down the sentence, "The melancholy atmosphere in the room made everyone feel quiet." By using the new word in a sentence, I was able to understand it better and remember it longer. One way to expand your vocabulary is to read widely. Read books, newspapers, and even watch videos in English. Pay attention to how words are used in context. If you don't understand a word, look it up and write it down. Over time, you'll start to notice patterns and learn new expressions that will make your English sound more advanced. You can also try using synonyms to diversify your vocabulary. For instance, instead of always saying happy, you could use words like joyful, content, or ecstatic, depending on the level of happiness you want to express. The more you expand your vocabulary, the more precise and expressive your English will become. And that wraps up today's episode. I hope you enjoyed these tips and real-life stories, and that they've given you some ideas for how to improve your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, English isn't just about learning grammar and vocabulary. It's also about understanding the culture, the context, and the way people actually use the language in everyday life. As you keep practicing, try to use the techniques we discussed today. Listen to real-life conversations. Pay attention to tone and intonation. Incorporate idioms, and don't forget the power of storytelling. The more you practice, the more natural and confident you'll become. If you're new to the English Pod community, make sure to check out our channel, where we upload new content every day to help you improve your English. If you found this episode helpful, feel free to share it with your friends who are also learning English. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Keep practicing, keep speaking, and remember, you're always improving, one step at a